Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
The first applause I've got all year. I must be doing something right. My name is Richard Saunders from the Australian Skeptics and the Skeptic Zone podcast. And if you will indulge me, folks, before we get into tonight's activity, I'll do a brief introduction for my next podcast. Hello and welcome to the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 661 for the 6th of June, 2021. Richard Saunders coming to you live from Sydney Skeptics in the Pub. It's not like we rehearsed that or anything. Coming up on this week's show, interviews from Skeptics in the Pub. We're so pleased to be back here once again. Our last meeting was last year, in fact, in March. So it's really nice to be back with you all again. Also coming up on this week's episode, the Book of Tim with Tim Mendham, everybody. He's over there. Oh, poor Tim. And the Book of Tim is Tim with items from the Skeptic magazine on the table in front of me, folks. There's lots of copies of the Skeptic magazine and the Skeptical Inquirer. Please come forward at any convenient moment and help yourself to those magazines. We also have on this week's episode news from Australian Skeptics via the newsletter written by, Tim Mendham over there. You're getting fans slowly but surely, Tim. And this week's Trove segment, which is looking at digital archives of newspapers, looks at historical and hysterical references to the full moon and crime. Thank you, Tim. Does the full moon lead to more crime? We'll find out in the Trove segment. Well, that's all for me at the moment. It's time for me to sit at my table and have another drink. While I do that, I hope you all enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Oh, I've got to do this every week. You're too good, folks. Sometimes I admit, I feel nostalgia for the old days. I guess that's what nostalgia is. UFOs, aliens, close encounters of the third kind, all the sorts of things that were very familiar to me growing up in the 1970s. And once more, for the record, of course, and this is something that I've been saying ever since I was in the skeptical movement, and it's broadly the consensus of skeptics worldwide, is that we're not saying aliens cannot and have not visited the Earth. But, in the words of Carl Sagan,
for all I know, we may be visited by a different extraterrestrial civilization every second Tuesday. But there's no support for this appealing idea. The extraordinary claims are not supported by extraordinary evidence.
To this day, we are still battling people who think that we skeptics don't, won't, can't believe in extraterrestrial life or the possibility that somehow they have managed to find Earth and are buzzing around in their spaceships. It's just exceedingly unlikely, and there's no good supporting evidence. And it seems to me that UFOs and stories of aliens have it's a frequency, it comes and goes. At the moment, it's back again. There was a special here in Australia last week on UFOs and aliens. And soon the United States government are going to be releasing some files or other. But apparently, as reported by CNN, on the 4th of June by Zachary Cohen and Katie Bo Williams, U.S. intelligence officials have no evidence confirming Navy pilot UFO encounters were alien spacecraft. And this says in part, U.S. intelligence officials have no evidence confirming that unidentified flying objects encountered by the U.S. Navy pilots in recent years were alien spacecraft, but also have not reached a definitive assessment as to what these mysterious objects might be, according to 5 sources familiar with the findings of an upcoming report on UFOs that is expected to be delivered to Congress later this month. According to 3 of those sources, the report does not, however, rule out the possibility that they are alien spacecraft. Why, that's all very well. They also don't rule out that it's you, dear listener, tricking them by flying around in something you invented. In other words, not ruling something out does not mean it's even remotely likely to be what's causing these sightings. While that uncertainty is likely a blow to the hopes of UFO enthusiasts who are hoping for definitive proof of extraterrestrial life, it does not minimize the significance of the report, what sources describe as a years-long battle inside the Pentagon over whether even to acknowledge what are now hundreds of unexplained sightings by US military personnel. Later on in the report it says, "No proof of little green men." Isn't that interesting that antiquated saying is still in use? I guess it's part of our culture. Little green men. As if aliens must be smaller than us, be men, and be green. Little green men. The upcoming report is unlikely to satisfy UFOologists who support what's known as, quote, disclosure, end quote, or the government release of definitive evidence that it has been contacted by extraterrestrial life. Quote, most people would be hoping for visual evidence of little green men, which is almost certainly not going to be the case, end quote, a congressional aide told CNN, referring to expectations about the report's contents. Now, there is more on that report from CNN. I'll link to that in this week's show notes. But with all this recent talk about UFOs and government reports and TV specials here in Australia, this came to my notice, posted on Facebook, a link at least from the Centre for Inquiry. And it's a poster you can download and put on the wall next to your UFO pictures, I guess. Skeptical Inquirer's tips for keeping UFO reporting grounded in reality. And there's some good advice here. Unidentified does not equal aliens. Sources often conflate sightings of something in the sky with extraterrestrials. Most UFOs become IFOs, identified flying objects. Just because alien life is possible, it doesn't mean they're here. The fact that some astronomers believe on a statistical basis that life may exist elsewhere in the universe does not mean they think that aliens may have arrived or that they ever will. We can't identify everything. Not every question gets answered. There are always going to be some unresolved sightings, often where very little is known or recorded. UFO enthusiasts have motivations. There are always going to be officials among the sprawling defense agency and their contractors who have to take the reports of UFOs seriously, as well as politicians and public figures for whom UFO controversies serve their particular ends. Talk to the actual experts. When possible, it's best to seek out independent, knowledgeable, scientific and technical sources, not just enthusiasts and believers. CSI can connect journalists to these experts. And as an aside, I'll say, so can the Australian Skeptics. Anecdote is not data. Statements from sources such as, it flew away at speeds unimaginable, or turned in a way impossible for any aircraft today, are not reliable. Remember Occam's razor. Even highly advanced imaging equipment is susceptible to errors and human misinterpretations. Plausible, terrestrial explanations have been advanced for all the US Navy videos that have caused so much fuss. And I think that last bit largely refers to the work done by Mick West, who we've spoken about before on the Skeptic Zone, and his excellent videos simply examining the evidence put forward by UFO proponents, such videos known as TikTok and Go Fast. So it appears to me that mid-2021 will simply be catalogued in the long annals of UFO history as a blip, another uptick before the predicted downtick, and in a couple of years, 2, 3, 4, there'll be something else happening. Maybe when there are more moon landings or so on and so forth. But again, in the words of Carl Sagan,
in the vastness of the cosmos, there must be other civilizations far older and more advanced than ours. So shouldn't we have been visited? Shouldn't there be every now and then alien ships in the skies of Earth? There's nothing impossible in this idea, and no one would be happier than me if we were being visited. But has it happened in fact? What counts is not what sounds plausible, not what we'd like to believe, not what one or two witnesses claim, but only what is supported by hard evidence, rigorously and skeptically examined. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
yes, good old UFOs, a blast from the past, and something which will probably come and go for the foreseeable future.
This is Kyle from the Data Skeptic podcast. If you're curious about the way data is changing our world, topics like AI and all this craziness with Facebook and bots and the Twitter storm and how the algorithms that underline that work, and you don't want a technical deep dive, you want it in the vernacular in a way that people can understand, check us out at Data Skeptic. That's what we try and do. I interview advanced professionals in the field who do this sort of research, and then I get into interesting projects as well. We're a weekly show, and you can find us at dataskeptic.com.
I can't believe it, folks. Here we are in the Occidental Hotel, the first time since March 2020. And then, well, you know what happened. We were going to have Skeptics in the Pub last month here in the pub. That was cancelled at the last minute because of COVID. And I'm here a little bit early to have a quick chat to my friend Daryl Coloughn. Hello, Daryl.
G'day. Hi there, Richard.
And thanks for coming along to Mind, Body, Wallet the other week. It was quite an experience. It's always an experience, isn't it?
It's always an experience. And one of the things that interested me was the genuine things that were there. The UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, had a stall there.
The Flying Doctors.
Them, canteen.
Yeah.
There was a stall that was selling photographs or images of the moon at any chosen date.
Yes.
For example, your birthday. Now, I wouldn't necessarily be interested in such a thing, but it's real. It's not a. I assume that they're doing a real thing. It's not a fake, but most of the material there at that exhibition was, of course.
Well, what shall we say? Yes, of course it was, yes. Without putting too fine a point on it. There's all sorts of words we can look up in the thesaurus for nonsense. But but in all seriousness, there's lots at Mind, Body, Wallet, which is fun and interesting and good and yummy, to be blunt.
Yeah, including the food and coffee.
Including the food and coffee. Anyway, but here we are. We're back at Skeptics in the Pub. We're a bit early, as I said, just to have a bit of a chat. There's a few people are turning up already, which is really good. Dr. Brad is talking tonight, but it's just nice to be back in the pub. So cheers, Daryl.
Cheers.
That's a long time between drinks. And here at Skeptics in the Pub, Tim, it's great to be back in the pub. He's lost his voice.
It's very good to be back here. Thanks, Richard. I'm really enjoying it, actually seeing real-life people.
It's great. I've just spent the happy 5 minutes bending spoons for a table full of people, which was just great fun after not doing it for a year.
Yeah, because doing sort of bending spoons online is not as much fun.
It's just not as much.
Especially with radio.
No, it's good on the radio.
I've seen you do it on radio.
You've seen me do it on the radio, have you?
I know, it's a very interesting thing, actually. It's a bit weird, but yes. But I know, I agree. I think it's just meeting people. There's a lot of people here for the first time.
There are. We had a great turnout for Dr. Brad McKay, yes.
Because they've obviously been saving up their enthusiasm and energy to actually meet the skeptics in the flesh, and they've done that. And it's been great to talk to people who...
It is, and there's lots of people still hanging around after the talk, which is really nice to see. I might wander over this way. I've just bent more spoons. These poor spoons, I tell you. 3 now. Have you seen spoon bending before?
Just in YouTube videos.
Now you know how it's done.
Exactly. I will try it myself at all.
The next YouTube video you'll see will be her, right? And she'll be saying, look, I can really bend spoons. But thank you everybody for coming along to Skeptics in the Pub tonight, because this is the first one we've had in over a year. And it's just so nice to be back here to socialise, to have a few drinks and to bend a few spoons. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for organising it.
Oh, our pleasure, and I hope you'll be back next month.
Definitely.
Just before you go, Dr. Brad McKay, wow, what a great talk tonight. Great to have you back at Skeptics in the Pub.
It's weird to be out in public again. I've been in a hole for the whole year.
Haven't we all? Tonight you gave a talk about your new book, which we interviewed you about a few weeks ago on the Skeptic Zone. Maynard interviewed you. How's the book going?
It's going very well. I haven't been trolled too much yet, so that I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. But time will tell. But yeah, it's been received well. I haven't pissed too many people off, and
well, you're not doing it right then.
I know. It's good to see photos coming through from people finding the book at the airport and at different bookstores around. So it's certainly out there and available.
That's really good. And the book is called again?
It's called Fake Medicine. Perfect for skeptics. And yes, a great passive-aggressive present for all of your loved ones who believe in QAnon conspiracy theories or in alternative medicine.
Well, folks, I'll link to that once again in the show notes. But Brad, thank you so much for being our first speaker back here in the pub after all this time.
It's very exciting. Yeah, seeing you in 3D, Richard.
I have not heard that one before. Thank you. Thanks, Brad.
Hi, this is Rob Palmer. I write the well-known Skeptic column in Skeptical Inquirer Online, and I'm a team member of the Guerrilla Skeptics on Wikipedia project, GSOW. But you fine folks may know me because I contributed segments for several episodes of this podcast. Check out my interviews from SciCon 2019, starting with episode 576. So here's a little known fact. All of my skeptical activism stems from discovering the Skeptic Zone. Yep, I first heard of the GSOW project right here back in 2012 due to Richard's selfless support of it and other skeptical activities around the world. I can honestly say I'd likely still be a skeptical couch potato if I hadn't discovered this podcast. So besides giving back to the Zone by contributing occasional segments, I contribute to the success of the show with ongoing monthly micropayments, and I'm asking you to consider doing the same. You can do that by following the Patreon or PayPal links at skepticzone.tv. Every donation supports the show, and Richard will really appreciate it.
Let's take a look at the Australian Skeptics Newsletter, newsletter number 124. And this was sent on the 1st of June 2021. Hi all, it says, lately we've had a cluster of science rejection/denial stories and a cluster of UFO stories. Coincidence? I think not. Plus, believe it or not, a few stories on COVID and vaccination. What a surprise! Read on, Tim Mendham. And of course this is written and compiled by Tim Mendham, and each story has a link you can click to read more about the article. COVID elimination, not mitigation, creates best outcomes. French study says that countries that consistently aim for elimination, maximum action to control SARS-CoV-2 and stop community transmission as quickly as possible, including lockdown, have generally fared better than countries that opt for mitigation, i.e., action increased in a stepwise targeted way to reduce cases so as not to overwhelm the healthcare systems. Why you should be skeptical of recent UFO reports. A story on recent UFO videos in the US with good scientific explanations, but UFO stories still abound. See later in this newsletter. US study, low vaccination and low IQ. Study looks at US vaccination rates vis-a-vis average IQ scores. The result, 5 of the 10 states with the lowest IQs are among the 10 states with the lowest rates of fully vaccinated adults, and half of the 10 smartest states rank among the 10 most vaccinated ones. One question has to be asked. Is the rating of average IQ substantiated? A tough one to consider. Why people aren't getting vaccinated. A brief article offering categories based on people's support or rejection of COVID vaccination. Factors contributing to science rejection across countries. A paper from the Netherlands looks at why people choose to believe nonsense. This is the subject of the feature in the coming issue of the Skeptic magazine. And a link there so you can subscribe, but of course, you can subscribe by going to skeptics.com.au. Pseudoscience can lead to real harm. A heartfelt plea from a teacher retiring from promoting popular science. A lot of this you've probably met before, but this is a succinct argument in favour of reasonable thinking in the face of rampant pseudoscience. Why you should reconsider astrology. Wouldn't normally bother too much about an article written by an astrologer to convince themselves of the legitimacy of their art. But this one is notable for misunderstanding objections to astrology. Quote, skeptics generally fall into one of two categories. The first bunch is dismissive of astrology because they never got a legit intro to it. Their exposure may have been limited to generalized, amateur-written horoscopes. The second is the full-blown haters, hell-bent on blowing it off as useful as a fortune cookie or magic 8-ball, and they're somehow incensed by its mere existence, end quote. Nothing then about astrology being an unproven practice based on pseudoscientific nonsense? University of Wollongong teaching dowsing to kids update. And you might remember we mentioned this an episode or two ago. Last newsletter, we alerted our readers to the University of Wollongong promoting a course for kids in years 3 and 4 on dowsing as part of its early learning lab workshops. The blurb for the course was full on, quote, "This is for real," end quote. Our readers were outraged and contacted the uni to express their concern. Within minutes, the course was cancelled. This wasn't a huge thing, just a short course for kids. Nothing like a uni giving a PhD to an anti-vaccination rant, for instance. But it does show that skeptical activism works and can work quickly when the message is clear and forthright. Keep that in mind when the next pseudoscientific PhD comes along. The Secret Science Club. We're told that this monthly series of science lectures ran live in Brooklyn, New York for some years before the pandemic. It's now moved online. It's free, although donations are gratefully accepted. For the first time, they are releasing recordings of past presentations. Then we have information about the next issue of the Skeptic magazine. The June 2021 issue of the Skeptic will hit stands very soon, metaphorically speaking. It has a major feature on why people believe, as opposed to what they believe, what psychologists and science leaders think, the legal implications of holding beliefs, and case studies of the victory of belief over reason. We'll also be looking at the myths and conspiracies associated with the Port Arthur massacre, that tragic event which occurred 25 years ago. and a history of your favourite organisation, the Oximetrical Society. The newsletter also lists upcoming events in Sydney, Queensland, Canberra, Perth, Adelaide, Victoria, Gold Coast, Canberra again, they are busy. And items of interest include various links to recent alien stories, including former President Barack Obama. And another late item here, Sydney Highway that locals say is haunted by slain hitchhiker. A pair of ghost hunters investigating a paranormal Australian highway claim to have encountered the spirit of a slain hitchhiker while wandering the road late at night. You don't see many hitchhikers around anymore. Sydney's Wakehurst Parkway is hardly a highway, a stretch of road winding through bushland in the city's northern beaches. But it, quote, is known for falling into near total darkness at night, end quote. Most of it is through the bush, so naturally falls into darkness. And finally, Psychic Parrot sees the ghost of a dog friend. A forehead slapper? Actually, this is more about the pros and cons of living with a noisy pet parrot. But the video of the talking bird is cute. But why print the story as one long, single paragraph? And just mentioning UFOs, the 7 Network ran a feature special on last Sunday night. UFOs, Australia's own UFO cover-up, exposed in 7 News Spotlight investigation. It went for an hour and a half, a very long hour and a half. It promised much and delivered nothing. Sadly, what annoyed me was having to sit through it in the first place. Well, that's pretty annoying, but the frequent use of debunked videos like Tic Tac and Go Fast and the recent Pyramid ones. It's funny how these UFO hunters and investigators keep screaming that they want the truth to come out, the truth to come out. When the truth is out there, they ignore it or pretend it doesn't happen because it doesn't match with what they want, and they want UFOs to be real. Or at least they want people to think UFOs are real long enough to watch their program, which I did. The documentary, so-called documentary, was also full of eyewitness accounts and claims of government conspiracy, etc., etc. We've seen it all before, we've heard it all before, going back decades and decades and decades. Some of the gems from decade past include Chariots of the Gods, Overlords of the UFO, Mysteries of the Gods, It Has Begun, UFO Syndrome, The Alien Autopsy, Australian UFOs and Alien Encounters Down Under, UFO Phenomenon, Seeing is Believing. So this one, 7 News Spotlight special, The Phenomenon, I like to use that word, reveals the truth about UFOs, is simply next on the list, and it will be catalogued and become part of history, and I think in 10 years they'll have a brand new documentary exposing the truth, and they're out there and the government's conspiracies are out there. Mick West, if you're listening, we do appreciate you. And you can subscribe to that newsletter yourself at skeptics.com.au.
Hey, fellow skeptics.
Ben Radford here.
With Celestia Ward.
Your friendly host of Squaring the Strange.
A podcast that looks at topics ranging from legends, panics, and cryptids.
To meaty myths, psychology, and folklore.
Breaking things down and picking things apart.
As we skeptics do.
We bring a few different perspectives on things.
Celestia, for example, is a witty cartoonist.
And Ben is a brilliant writer and longtime skeptical investigator.
We don't always agree.
But we have fun trying.
And we learn new things.
Join us for new topics every week or two.
Or browse our backlog of evergreen episodes.
Available on iTunes and all your podcast feeding troughs.
Squaring the Strange.
Take care, strangers.
Bye-bye.
And now, a reading from the Book of Tim. With Tim Mendham.
Hi, my name's Tim Mendham. I'm the editor of Australian Skeptics magazine, The Skeptic, and this one is for our friends in Leighton Buzzard. Today I'll be reading from the Skeptic magazine, September 2017, which is volume 37, number 3. And I'm taking the reading from our regular column, What Goes Around, which is based on the premise that you can start off with a particular fact or anecdote and by various connections work your way all the way back round to where you started from. And the reading today is about staring, storing and summoning up. And we're looking at the psychic staring effect, which is sometimes called scopaesthesia, which is a supposed phenomenon in which humans detect being stared at by extrasensory means. The idea was first explored by psychologist Edward B. Titchener in 1898, after students in his junior classes reported being able to feel when somebody was looking at them, even though they could not see this person. Titchener performed a series of laboratory experiments that found only negative results. The effect has been the subject of contemporary attention from parapsychologists and fringe researchers from the 1980s onwards, not to mention a school classroom test by Victorian skeptic Adam van Langenberg, which you can read about in an earlier issue of our magazine, volume 32, number 3. Edward Bradford Titchener, who lived from 1867 to 1927, was a British psychologist best known for creating his version of psychology that described the structure of the mind, structuralism. He created the largest doctoral program in the United States at the time after becoming a professor at Cornell University, and his first graduate student, Margaret Floy Washburn, became the first woman to be granted a PhD in psychology. He was a charter member of the American Psychological Association, became the American editor of Mind magazine in 1894 and associate editor of the American Journal of Psychology in 1895 and wrote several books. In 1904 he founded the group The Experimentalists, which continues today as the Society of Experimental Psychologists. Titchener's brain was donated to the Wilder Brain Collection at Cornell. Now, the Wilder Brain Collection in the Cornell University Department of Psychology houses approximately 120 human brains from an original collection of 600, so I'm not quite sure what happened to the others. It was created by Bert Wilder in 1889 to collect the brains of educated and orderly persons. Brains on display include that of Edward H. Ruloff, also known as Ruloff, Rulofson or Rulofson, a 19th century American doctor, lawyer, schoolmaster, photographer, inventor, carpet designer, phrenologist, philologist, and serial killer. Ruloff's brain is said to be one of the largest on record. The collection also includes a piece of a pumpkin that was placed on the spike of the university's McGraw Tower in 1997, and Wilder's own brain. Bert Green Wilder, born 1841, died 1925, was an American comparative anatomist. He graduated at Harvard from the Lawrence Scientific School in 1862 and the medical department in 1866. During part of the US Civil War, he served as surgeon of the 55th Negro Massachusetts Infantry. From 1867 to his retirement in 1910, he was professor of neurology and vertebrate zoology at Cornell. In 1885, he was president of the American Neurological Association and in 1898 of the Association of American Anatomists. Wilder is credited with the earliest known instance of the term neuron in 1884, when he used the word to describe the cerebrospinal axis, also known as the central nervous system. Neurons are cells that send and receive electrochemical signals to and from the brain and the nervous system. There are about 100 billion neurons in the brain. In 2012, MIT researchers showed for the first time that memories are stored in specific brain cells. By triggering a small cluster of neurons, the researchers were able to force the subject to recall a specific memory. By removing these neurons, the subject would lose that memory. The location of memory in the brain was the subject of a debate in the late 1980s between Professor Stephen Rose, neuroscientist from the Open University, and Rupert Sheldrake, former biochemist and cell biologist at Cambridge. Alfred Rupert Sheldrake, 1942 and still living, English author, researcher and parapsychologist known for the debunked concept of morphic resonance. In a column in The Guardian, he wrote that the idea that memories were stored in our brains was only a theory, and despite decades of research, the phenomenon of memory remains mysterious. Sheldrake attacked his critic Rose for following materialism, arguing that quantum physics had overturned materialism and suggested that memories may turn out to depend on morphic resonance rather than memory traces. Sheldrake ventured into paranormal areas, one of his books being The Sense of Being Stared At, exploring telepathy, precognition, and the psychic staring effect, which is where we came from in the start. And that's What Goes Around from Skeptic, September 2017, Volume 37, Number 3. And you can download that copy and most of our magazines from our website, skeptics.com.au. And while you're there, why not have a look at the subscription form, and you can find out what future stories we'll have as soon as they arrive.
Hi, my name's Jo Thornley, and I'd like you to join my I'd like you to listen to my podcast about cults called Zealot. It's available pretty much anywhere you find podcasts, with further reading on the Zealot Facebook page. Each episode, a guest joins me to talk about a specific cult, where we answer the big questions like, is there yoga in it? And does anyone think they're Jesus? Does anyone think they're Jesus? Pop over to my compound and have a listen. I've just mixed up a fresh batch of Kool-Aid.
Oh, Zealot.
Now let's look once more into those digital archives from around the world. Online newspapers, gazettes, magazines, and so on. Digitised by national libraries, archivists, whatever the case may be. I'm glad they're doing it because it gives us access to a treasure trove of information. Now, inspired by the so-called blood moon eclipse from a couple of weeks ago, I thought we would look into reports about the full moon and crime. And I've picked 3 items of interest. The first one comes to us from 1972, published in the Amarillo Globe Times on the 21st of June. Full moon on Miami means rise in crime. Dallas, Associated Press. When the full moon peers down on Dallas, it doesn't send any chills up the spines of police. A recent report from Miami stated the police there literally dread the full moon, even though it hasn't been scientifically proven that one means trouble. The full moon is the Miami police guide as to when the volume of crime, both minor and violent, will increase. In Dallas, police scoff at that belief. As far as we're concerned, the full moon is just another day for us. We don't pay any attention to it, said homicide captain Jack Davis. However, Miami has a study on which to base its fear. Dr. Arnold Lieber, psychiatric consultant for its police department, recently completed an in-depth study of all the crime data. It indicated a definite trend that shows more service calls, crime, and other police activity on days of the full moon. Dr. Lieber said he studied the crime trend over a more than 10-year period. While no major study on the moon-crime relationship has been conducted in Dallas, a brief look at this year's murder rate seems to discount the theory. Through the first 5 full moons this year, none of the city's 80 homicides were recorded on any of the days with full moons. Service calls on the alleged violent days have not been drastically above the total of other days. Only once, on April 28th, did the service calls rise sharply. The most common explanation given for a belief in more crime on full moon days is the pressure exerted by a full moon. It causes high tides, and astrologists believe it puts the same pressure on the human brain, thus making a person less likely to control his behaviour or violent tendencies. And that reminds me of something I heard just the other day on the radio as I was driving along. And forgive me, I can't remember who was speaking, but it was about crime statistics and full moons and things like that. And the story related was that a certain police department thought that the full moon caused more crime because more crime was reported on full moons, but it appears that is because the police department were more vigilant and sent out more patrols on nights with full moons. Thus, the normal rate of crime that would have happened anyway, well, more of that was reported. And so it was sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Interesting stuff. Anyway, the next item we come to is from the Las Vegas Sun, dated the 7th of February 1976. A piece by Harold Hyman, Crime and the Full Moon. A popular notion through the years has been that the phases of the moon and incidents of violent crime are somehow related. When the moon is full, some people say, the rate of violent or passionate crime increases. By passionate crime, they mean murder, suicide, assault, rape, family fights, some type of vandalism, automobile, manslaughter, reckless driving, and in general the kinds of crime that go hand in hand with strong emotion. Many policemen subscribe to this theory. They watch the moon, and when it approaches the full phase, they will carry an extra gun in their boot, approach people with extreme caution, and generally assume that the populace is apt to be squirrely. A little aside here from me, they will carry an extra gun in their boot. That's quite funny because here in Australia, the boot is the trunk of the car. But here, I'm sure it means the boot you wear. So the police carry an extra gun in their footwear. We read on. A common phrase in the police squad room before a work shift during the full or waxing moon is, "Watch out for the squirrels out there tonight." The theory is that the tidal pull of the moon somehow affects our bodies and causes still not understood mood changes. After all, our bodies are mostly water and therefore subject to moon-caused tidal forces, just as oceans are, adherents argue. One Metro officer assigned to the county jail swears the full moon causes inmate disturbances. "You can see it coming," he says, and his eyes get wide. "As the moon gets larger night after night, we have more fights. Usually we can hold things down well enough. But there are those times, and they come with the full moon, when a mass inmate fight breaks out and they half kill each other before we can get in and stop it." The jailer adds that as the moon wanes, so do passions of inmates. Disturbances become less frequent. When the moon is in its final or new phase, there is absolutely no trouble at all, he says. But what do statistics show? Police keep accurate records of crimes and arrests. Their statistics do not support the full moon theory. Not at all. Passionate and violent crimes occur during every phase of the moon, during every part of the month. Certainly the night of a full moon may see a rise in police and ambulance calls, but that rise can and does occur at other times when the moon is waning and, according to the theory, when the incidence of lunar activity should be decreasing. Conversely, there are full moon nights when there is hardly any police activity at all, and the calls that do come in relate to long-term embezzlement, forgery, natural death, and the kinds of crimes that are not governed by emotion or by the moon or anything relating to either. What one begins to suspect after talking to policemen who believe the full moon theory, and after examining the record, is that the policemen themselves are squirrels and moon freaks. They believe in the theory because it is something to believe in, not because it is true. Besides, it is romantic or dramatic, something that puts zip into the day or the night's activity, and something that makes great party conversation. Let's switch from the moon, but not from police. The following tidbit from police headquarters doesn't normally get into the papers, and it's time that it does. Cops assigned to West Las Vegas take their lives in their hands whenever they answer a call, and that goes for black cops as well as white. To most of the bums who hang around the pool halls, the bars and street corners, cops are pigs. With depressing regularity, police cars are targets of rocks and bottles when officers arrive to answer the most simple disturbance call. This includes North Las Vegas. A few nights ago, North Las Vegas cops went to a house on Helen Street to answer a disturbance call from neighbors who complained of a too loud party. When the cops arrived, they were met with whiskey bottles thrown from the front porch. They called for help. More bottles and large rocks were heaved at the arriving squad cars. Metro came in with extra assistance, and the confrontation became a standoff with neither the cops nor the partygoers giving an inch. The bottles and rocks stopped flying, but the partygoers would not disperse. The two sides just stood there and looked at each other. Finally, the cops backed off. They had to. What else was there to do? The situation is not uncommon. It happens more often as the months pass. Police cars assigned to West Las Vegas frequently come back to headquarters with their side windows, emergency red lights, and sometimes their windshields broken out. The cops think they're lucky they don't come back in the same condition. And the byline, Harold Hyman, a veteran reporter, has covered crime for The Sun for a decade. It was his personal suspicion that crime frequency corresponded to full moons, so he researched and found it untrue. And that was interesting that after the full moon piece, the story went on about the problems that faced police in Las Vegas. And I wonder after about 45 years, whether that is still the case. Maybe my friend Celestia Ward from Squaring the Strange, who lives in Las Vegas, she might know. And finally, we come to the Lethbridge Herald. And I'm not sure where that is from, the Lethbridge Herald. Anyway, it's dated the 1st of August 2007. But it does involve a story from Vienna. Full moon is not connected to accidents. Vienna, Austria, Associated Press. Ever whacked your thumb with a hammer or wrenched your back after lifting a heavy box and blamed the full moon? It's a popular notion, but there's no cosmic connection, Austrian government researchers said Tuesday. Robert Seeberger, a physicist and astronomer at the Ministry of Economic Affairs, said a team of experts analysed 500,000 industrial accidents in Austria between 2000 and 2004 and found no link to lunar activity. The full moon does not unfavourably affect the likelihood of an accident, Seeberger said. The study, released Tuesday by the General Accident Insurance Office, said that on average there were 415 workplace accidents registered per day. Yet on days when the moon was full, the average actually dipped to 385, although the difference was not statistically significant. The lunar influence theory dates at least to the 1st century AD, when the Roman scholar Pliny the Elder wrote that his observations suggested the moon produces drowsiness and stupor in those who sleep outside beneath her beams. Seeberger, who advises the Austrian government on accident prevention, said he and fellow researcher Manfred Huber decided to take a closer look because the full moon theory kept surfacing again and again. They also checked for a possible interplay between the rate of accidents and the position of the moon, theorizing that gravity might have some effect in tripping people up at work. But the moon orbits the planet in almost a perfect circle, and there was no statistically significant relationship between the accident rate and the moon's closest proximity to Earth. There were an average of 400 accidents on days when the moon nudged closest, the study found, compared to an average of 396 per day at other times. Past studies have differed on whether the full moon affects humans by subtly influencing, quote, biological tides, end quote. A landmark study published in 1984 by the British Medical Journal examined the incidence of crimes reported to police from 1978 to 1982 in 3 locations: in India, 1 rural, 1 urban, 1 industrial, and found a spike in crime on full moon days compared to all other days. But another study, done in Canada in 1998 by University of Saskatchewan researchers, looked at nearly 250,000 traffic accidents that caused property damage or non-fatal injuries over a 9-year period and found no relationship to the lunar phase. Most scientists agree that at nearly 385,000 kilometers away, the moon is simply too distant and human beings too small for it to have any significant effect. There is no real reason why it should, said D. John Hillier, a professor of astronomy at the University of Pittsburgh, who was not involved in the Austrian study. It's often probably just cases of people remembering that there happened to be a full moon when something occurred, he said. When nothing special happens, they tend not to notice what the moon is doing. So this selective memory just keeps the legend going. And that was just 3 of the many articles returned when I do a search for full moon and crime. I guess I could have done one for full moon and hospitals or something like that. I might have found some interesting results as well. By and large, all in all, I think it's more or less recognized that the full moon doesn't have these sort of effects on humans that are claimed. Although, like many myths, it is fun to research. And you too can enjoy researching articles and newspapers and clippings and so on. If you're in Australia or anywhere in the world, you can go to Trove at Trove, trove.nla.gov.au. But why not go online and check out what your country is doing by way of archiving newspapers and magazines? Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. Richard Saunders here with you, back again in the studio. And what a fantastic time it was to be out and about meeting people at Skeptics in the pub. Really happy that's back again, and really feeling for the people in Victoria, in Melbourne, who are still suffering from the lockdown. But you know what? Knowing people in Melbourne, it's a pain, to be sure. It's not good. But I think they've had plenty of practice, and I think they're very adaptable. And I'm sure the people in Melbourne are just getting on with it. They know what they have to do. I've got many good friends in Melbourne who I miss very much, and I pay tribute to their resilience. I think they've been going in and out of lockdown more than anywhere else in the country. But it is a pity to see those protesters fronting up at vaccination centres to rail and rant and carry on. They make the news. They yell freedom and all these sovereign citizen arguments and conspiratorial thinking, as I said, and the government are full of microchips and blah, blah, blah. You've heard it all before. But it's good to see people in Melbourne are treating these people with the contempt they deserve and still fronting up to get their vaccinations. Coming up on next week's show, more Book of Tim with Tim Mendham, more from the Trove archives. I just have to look and see what to do, see what to research in those Trove archives. Thank you to those people who've commented to me at the pub, actually, Skeptics in the Pub, how much they enjoy the Trove segment, historical items and news reports about matters of interest to skeptics. And thank you to those people who contribute to the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal at skepticzone.tv. It means the show keeps going, and all you people out there listening to the show, regardless, I'm very pleased you do that. But you can thank those people who contribute, even if it's $1 a week or $2 a week or something like that to the show. It means you get to listen to it. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.